Hey, this is Mark A. Altman.
And this is DAREN DOCHTERMAN.
And this is Ashley Miller.
And we are the Inglorious Treksperts.
Go behind the scenes of all your favorite Star Trek series, from the original series to today, with the stars, writers, producers, and more, every Thursday, wherever you listen to podcasts.
And for more, subscribe at trekspertsplus.com.
It's the logical thing to do.
Keep on trekking. Ingloriously, of course. Hey, this is Mark A. Altman.
This is DAREN DOCHTERMAN, and we are the Inglorious Treksperts.
I thought it was a classic femme fatale. So much fun.
Like that Shakespearean lace in your acting.
I said, Gene, what do you want from this character?
I want you to just take the character and make it your own.
I had a good time on the film.
On day one, the movie was already $15 million over budget.
We started this movie without an ending. That's like painting yourself into a corner.
I don't think we've ever had a Star Trek captain on our show.
Being, as you said, number one on the call sheet, it is a producer's position if you're going to take it seriously. I was so glad they didn't cast me as Lorca.
You famously wrote that script in 12 days.
On one level, I wrote the script, and on another level, the story was written by everybody and his brother.
Well, I was going to say, what was your response when you were directing and Terry, sort of called you aside and said, hey, I want you to get back in front of the camera again?
I said, he sort of chummed the water a little bit. Are you ready to play Riker? What I thought he was saying was, you better go to the gym and lose some weight. Lines. Are you going to trim your beard? Don't cut your hair. My interest was totally piqued. It's not hyperbole to say it's the best Riker material I've ever had.
New episodes available every Thursday, wherever you listen to podcasts. Or subscribe today at TrekspertsPlus.com.
But keep on trekking, ingloriously, of course. Hey, this is Mark A. Altman.
This is DAREN DOCHTERMAN.
This is Ashley Miller.
And we are the Inglorious
Treksperts. Did I get it right?
You got it.
Yeah,
right.
you did great. I'm not saying anything. I'm not the Beach Boys. I can't do it in chorus with other people. I'm just not going to say.
Damn
it.
you, sir. You will try.
I'm not going to do the harmonies. It's not working.
You just headed down Dead Man's Curve is what you did.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. I'm not making no pet sounds. Anyway, welcome to Chronicling the Chroniclers. This was a fantastic panel from our STLV Trekspert stage, in which we united a bunch of people, authors and journalists who covered Star Trek in some of the best Star Trek books ever published. Everybody from Mike and Denise OKUDA, who did the legendary Star Trek Encyclopedia, and we had Larry Nemechek for the Star Trek Companion, Ed Gross from the indispensable 50-year mission, and we also had Ben Robinson, who's done a bunch of Star Trek books like Voyager, A Celebration, Peter Holmstrom, who did the official center seat authorized companion, and Companion, that's right. Now that's Ralph Sinetsky. That's an entirely different episode.
That's the authorized companion.
And it was a really, I thought it was a really special thing. And it inspired my new show. I was thinking about, everybody was lobbying for Captain Sulu, right? Captain Sulu show, which I didn't quite get. In fact, Isaac and I watched Flashback recently, the anniversary episode of Voyager where Captain Sulu comes back, where they explain how Tuvok made the tea at the beginning of Star Trek VI. And I was just like, maybe I didn't need to see a Captain Sulu show. Not that interested. But you know what I wanted to see? I want to see Chekhov Your Enthusiasm. Basically, it's Chekhov going around complaining about stuff. So, like, you could have him just be him and Sulu complaining the whole time, because Walter's so good at that. It's like it would just be him kvetching about Captain Kirk getting all the good women and like how he doesn't get promoted and just like why all this stuff. I just think it'd be great. You just follow Chekhov around as he's and listening to him bitch about everything. It's kind of like a Lower Decks thing.
You had George in it. He could basically every week he has a different scheme to get himself promoted to captain.
Yeah. There's this thing in Flashback I didn't even remember where they bring Michael and Sarah back as Kang, which is awesome, right? We need no urgent aid humans, and only a fool fights in a burning house. And of course, he was also married to the great Barbara Eden.
Kang sounds like John Huston. Just letting you know.
What?
Down the house.
Okay, so whatever. But the thing is, so the first thing he says when he contacts the Excelsiors, well, I'm glad to see they promoted you to captain.
Oh my God!
And it was like, why the hell would Kang know? Kang doesn't even know who Sulu. He's the guy who drove the Enterprise. He wouldn't have known him from Day of the Dove. He wouldn't care, and he's a Klingon. He's not going to compliment.
Right. He's the guy that he ran through 3 times with a sword.
Right. It's not like he had some memorable sword fight, or it's like, wow, that Sulu's a badass, and he would have
right. Yeah, right. Where they met on the field of battle.
And shit,
yeah.
But
yeah. Plus, if anything, it was Chekhov was the one who was like, they killed Piotr. Chekhov was the one who was the one who was dealing with the Klingons. It was never Sulu.
Who's Piotr?
So I boy, that flashback. It's so funny because as good as Trials and Tribulations is on Deep Space Nine, man, flashback is not good.
It's not good.
Oh, no. And it could have been. I mean, George is good in it, all kidding aside.
George, I was just watching Flashback the other day, and it's not good. It's not good. Wait, why?
See,
why would you want to get saying? Why would you want to get promoted if you're not going to be on the regular show anymore?
No,
that doesn't make any sense.
Because I'll have my own ship, and I can tell everyone.
Literally, it's a 2-shot. The whole show is a 2-shot at the helm. It's like that scene in Amok Time.
It's like My Dinner with Andre.
Should we change? Should we set the course? Should we go back to Vulcan? Set the course for Vulcan. Are we going back to Vulcan? Let's go back to Vulcan. Right?
First we're going back to Vulcan. Now we're back to Altair.
Going back to Vulcan.
I don't think so.
No sleep till Vulcan.
Vulcan.
That's the Beastie Boys song I want to hear. But
we got plenty of Beastie Boys and Star Trek.
That stuff is so great. That stuff is so great. Like that's all you knew. You go to Ticonderoga, you set the freaking camera up, you got a 2-shot,
shoot
and
a bunch of episodes.
George and Walter bitching the whole time. Sulu and Chekhov bitching the whole time about just everything that's going on the ship.
Sulu, this coffee isn't very good.
I only drink tea. I don't drink coffee. It's not good for my metabolism.
If the tea tastes like this, I would think it was from a goat or something.
I don't drink goat milk. I wouldn't know.
See, there's your very short treks right there.
Yeah. Keep them that short.
I should be captain. Don't you think, Chekhov, I should be captain? I mean, you were the first officer on the Reliant briefly until you messed up finding a planet that was missing.
One of our planets is missing again.
I mean, it just goes to show the cis white male, every time you screw up the phasers, you don't get demoted. You didn't even know the phasers were cut off in the event of an engine imbalance. Not demoted.
That's what
then you get promoted.
Cis Russian male.
You become then you get to be second in command. I'm still driving the ship. I'm still the bus driver. But you're the guy who's second in command to Captain Terrell.
I'm not happy being the human speedometer.
What did you do to even become the second in command, the Reliant? What was so great about what you did? I'm still sitting here driving the Enterprise. Anyway.
I actually knew Lieutenant Kyle's name. That's the difference.
It was Kyle. Kyle. This is very confusing at times, but really useful in elementary school. Kyle.
Well, he didn't go off to do. He didn't go off to do the Green Berets.
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
I stayed at his post.
He stayed at his post.
It was just a piece of cake.
That's really funny. Well, so we did this panel. And it was
Chronicling the Chroniclers.
Well, we talked
Who chronicles
about
the Chronicles.
who chronicles the
Chronicles of Star Trek.
So it was so interesting because we all have the similar touchstone as to all of us, which is this making of Star Trek book, which not only inspired our careers in the industry, but in this case inspired us to write about Star Trek. So it's a really interesting perspective on sort of covering Star Trek and, as we said, the Rashomon of it all. And I was surprised at how powerful it was. It was a really terrific panel. Our old friend Scott Mance moderated. He did a great job. And we just had more and more people kept showing up. Jeff Bond showed up halfway through the panel, music of Star Trek author. And he also did a wonderful book about motion picture with Gene Kazicki, the visual effects of motion picture. And he showed up midway through. He's like, oh, I forgot I had this panel. It's like, come on up. Why not? I'll take my chair. Take my bag. That was another thing. So DAREN does these gorgeous bags for Vegas. It says, take my bag, right on the bag.
It says, take my bag, have some more fun.
Right, which of course is...
Wow.
Which is, you don't even know. It's this great line from Spectre the Gun. So we had them, and everybody who bought something at the table would get the bag with the stuff. Nobody noticed. No, I think it's San Jose. Someone noticed. That's the coolest thing ever. That was the first time we heard somebody say that's the coolest thing ever. It's like,
because it is the coolest thing ever. Although I think next time they need to be a little bit bigger so that we can put more stuff in them.
Yeah. No, definitely. But they can fit a book, which is good.
Yeah, they can fit your book. That's the only thing that it could fit.
Yeah, next year we'll do a quote from something else. But I guess we're gonna have to dumb it down. Apparently.
Well,
we're not doing
dumb it down. We don't dumb it down for anybody.
May history always remember the name Enterprise.
May history always remember the name.
I forgot. Chronicling the Chroniclers is the panel moderated by Enterprise Incident Scott Mance. I think you're going to dig it. So without any further ado, we're going to share it with you. And then, of course, after these brief commercial messages, and we'll be back after the panel because there's more to add.
Do we reach? I think we reach. I'm back, making my triumphant return from the panel in the other room. I'm Mark A. Altman, co-host of Inglorious Treksperts. And this is I'm so excited about this because people on this next panel, we all live in the shadow of Stephen Poe, a.k.a. Stephen Whitfield, who wrote a remarkable book called The Making of Star Trek. It's a book we all read very early, and it inspired us. Some of us to go into the industry, others to be journalists, others to write. And we have put together, I think, maybe a once-in-a-lifetime panel. I don't know. We'll find out. But of the great Star Trek journalists. And, it was funny. I was going to moderate, but it was sort of awkward because, I wrote 50-Year Mission with Ed Gross. And I'm like, is it going to be like Bananas where I'll sit and then I'll ask a question and I'll sit and talk about my book? It felt very weird. So I'm so lucky pinch hitting as moderator for this panel is one of my favorite people in the world. He's been helping us all weekend. He's the creator and the host of Enterprise Incidents podcast. He's going to have some very interesting news about the future of that podcast later this weekend. But I want to bring up our host for this next panel. It's none other than Scott Movie Man. Scott.
All right, so like Mark said, the making of Star Trek is the Holy Grail. It is the Holy Grail. There had never been a book about a making of a television series like that ever written. And in September of 1968, the very first printing of the making of Star Trek, which it's impossible to find a mint condition printing of that first print.
That is true.
It's impossible to find. But that book has inspired so many people. So many people have written books about the making of all of the Star Treks, including this guy, Mark A. Altman. If you are not gotten the 50-Year Mission volumes 1 and 2, then you are missing out. But I want to welcome to the stage other great friends who have written amazing nonfiction books, many of them over these years. First, I want to welcome to the stage, you know them because of their work on so many Star Trek shows and movies, including Star Trek Picard. One of these people made his Star Trek debut on The Voyage Home, but together they've written books on Star Trek. You know them as Mike OKUDA and Denise OKUDA. I also want to welcome to the stage here, he literally earned the title of Dr. Trek. Please welcome, we know him, we love him. It would not be a Star Trek celebration without him, Larry Nemecek. Our next guest has written many books, 9 by my count, including Star Trek Voyager, a celebration. Please welcome Ben Robinson. And then finally, I've been working with this guy as a producer on documentaries about 1982 and Christmas movies, but he's also written an oral history about Star Trek called The Center Seat. Please welcome my good friend Peter Holstrom. Sit right next to the lovely Denise OKUDA. All right, so I do want to start with Mike and Denise on this because when they were given their Lifetime Achievement Award by the Art Directors Guild, you brought up the making of Star Trek, and I even posted about the making of Star Trek on social media. Mike, you responded to this, how that book absolutely shaped your life. What was it about that book by Gene Roddenberry and Stephen Whitfield, quote unquote, that inspired you so much to not only work in Star Trek, but write books about Star Trek?
The Making of Star Trek by Stephen Whitfield Poe and Gene Roddenberry was the first book of its kind. It was the first book to look at making a television show. It was also the first in-depth look at Star Trek. And to those of us who loved the original series, we had this weekly adventure that we would go on into outer space, but then we realized there was a whole nother set of heroes, Gene Roddenberry and Bob Justman and Matt Jeffries and Dorothy Fontana and Gene Kuhn and all these people who made this show. And it made us, in our little minds, realize that that was a job one could aspire to.
All right, Larry. Go ahead, Denise.
I was just going to say it was a real education, and it carried through. And I mean, who knew we'd be working on Star Trek as adults? I mean,
I just remember that picture page of the phaser, which I studied. Just what I'm talking about. But Larry, like the shadow that made people create. It was a shadow, right? People were making props on that photo and making the phasers wrong. But Larry, because of just your literally your encyclopedic knowledge of Star Trek, how did that book particularly inspire you moving forward?
When you're a kid, you just got it because it was. When you're a kid, you just got it because it was just a Star Trek book. And Mike said, if you're an original series fan, well, at the time, if you were a Star Trek fan, because there was no bloody A, B, C, or D. It was just Star Trek. And you didn't know until years later that there was no book about how to make. You were just reading about Star Trek, and along the way you learned what a call sheet was, what a production report was, what a production staff, what visual effects are different than live effects, and all of that. And you're just so busy soaking up the Star Trek awareness that you've learned how the industry works. And it was just this little subversive book that we all learned, and a whole generation did the same thing.
The other book that really, because I was born literally the month that the second printing of the Making of Star Trek came out in November 1968. So really, another big impactful book for me was, I know a lot of people say the Star Trek Concordance by B. Joe Trimble, but for me it was the Star Trek Compendium written by the late, great Alan Asherman. And Mark, I know that was also a very important book for you. And this was, right after the motion picture came out. What was it about the compendium that was so special?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because, we lost Alan recently, Alan Asherman, and he was, part of First Fandom, and we really stand on the shoulder of giants. The compendium, his actually Making of Star Trek II is a pretty remarkable book. It's long out of print, but a fantastic resource written contemporaneously with the making of the movie. And of course, he also worked famously in New York at the Federation Trading Post. So it's a tremendous loss, but he was one of the first people to really go back and start interviewing these people. And I think it was something that we all learned, a lot from. And, we were much like V'ger. I think all of us, it's like, know all that is knowable, learn all that is learnable. And for all of us, it was like exploring all these areas of Star Trek. And I think it was now I call it Trek archaeology. And the history of Star Trek is like Rashomon, where, every story has 4 different versions, and we may never know what the truth is. But I think that's part of the fun for us, because we're all like detectives, trying to parse what's real and what's not and what's legend, because particularly the actors have a tendency, shockingly, to exaggerate or not to remember and make things up. So it's like, what's true, what's not? And Alan, when you go back, was one of the first people where you say, oh, okay, well, they said this in 1974, they said this in 1976, before they started changing their stories 100 times. So it was really helpful, and it's a tremendous loss to us all with Alan passing away.
Ben, I want to ask, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, for me, it was the first time I found out there were 79 episodes of Star Trek. I mean, I grew up in the UK, and it was like I didn't know Star Trek wasn't being made until 1976. I bought one of the poster magazines, and then they were talking to Shatner about how do you feel about how many years it's been. I was like, they're not making it. I was horrified, age 7. So books like that just gave you a checklist was like massively valuable then.
For me, it was B.J. Trimble's Concordance, which you mentioned, had the wheel, that great wheel.
Yeah.
That to me was sort of like, oh, so these are the episodes, and these are the episodes, and this is, the animated series. So that was immensely helpful. And then, there were some books like, David Gerald, certainly for a lot of us who worked in television and movies, David Gerald's Making of Trouble with Tribbles was a remarkable book because it showed various drafts of the script and how it evolved. And it was, I think, one of the first books other than Making of Star Trek, which really introduced us to the genius of Gene Coon and what a great heart he had.
Yeah, those were Ballantine books they did, Making Star Trek, The World of Star Trek, Making of the Trouble with Tribbles. And, I know absolutely when I got the Star Trek Next Generation Companion, I was like, I know Larry Nemechek was very much inspired by Alan Asherman's Companion.
I walked off. Yeah, I was a kid in Oklahoma who has been a fan but grew up on Making of and knew that bar in Alan's book and B. Joe's Concordance, obviously, and kept notes in it. Here's what wasn't quite right, but and got off on star charting. And oh my God, look at all these stars and planets. They need to be organized. And here's some real ones, and here's some fictitious ones, and all the French Joseph stuff, which wasn't. It was interesting, but the whole generation, the tech manual, the blueprints. I heard this story. So the blueprints were a huge seller, but because they weren't a book, they didn't count on the bestseller lists. And it took the tech manual being 12 or 14 weeks on the bestseller list was one of those things that dollar signs, along with the syndicated ratings and the convention kids showing up at conventions. And then when that was a New York Times bestseller for all those weeks, somebody was really getting the idea that maybe there's some money in this and a future after all.
Speaking of which, so what we have on the stage here are 2 professionals who wrote books on Star Trek, who actually worked on Star Trek. And you brought up the technical manual, which is a book that has been in print for 1,000 years.
Since your son burned hot in space.
Since before your race was born. So, question. So, Mike and Denise, I want to know, what kind of responsibility did you feel writing a Star Trek book while you were actually working on Star Trek shows?
That's a very good question because we worked on the shows, but also because we were fans. A lot of times when someone who works on the show writes a book, they feel, well, I work on the show, I can make stuff up. Who's going to know? Well, actually, everyone here will know.
We will know.
Yeah. Well, no, we knew that fans are incredibly discriminating consumers. So we felt deeply constrained in what we did. We needed to be able to show your proof, show your work. And I like to think that fans responded to that, responded to the discipline of, no, we're as much as possible going to document the aired episodes, not my theory, not the what the writer wrote in the blue draft, which is superseded by the pink draft, but what they actually saw, so that what they saw is correct.
And we had, of course, had all the scripts, and we corrected them to air, and we had the call sheets and the shooting schedules and blah, blah, blah. So we had it all there, and then we lived it because we were working on the show. So it did help tremendously.
It's a bit, when it comes to a point for any writer to write a book, a nonfiction book about the making of a Star Trek show or Star Trek's history, whatever, like what inspired you to take your first crack at it?
Well, actually, the beginning for me was the stuff that Mike and Denise had done. So Star Trek's really unusual in that it has two types of non-fiction book. So it has in-universe reality, like the tech manual, and then it has making of stuff, and those are really different. And I started on the Star Trek Fact Files, which was like the however many thousand pages version of the tech manual with all the illustrations, and that kind of thing of like, people really, really want to know what it's like to go and sit in there and press that button. What happens when you press that button, which I think...
It explodes.
On the original series, it melts. But that was a kind of genre that I don't think, it's a massive part of something like Harry Potter. Everybody wants to live in that world, that kind of world building. And that was a real beginning of that. But then the other side of it is the Stephen Poe, Stephen Whitfield stuff of wanting to know how a TV show is made. And I come from a TV film background. My family does it. So I had I wanted to celebrate the work of people who weren't necessarily actors. That for me was a big thing. It was like getting to talk to Matt Jeffries or to Dorothy or, all those kind of people about what was it actually like to make the show and why do decisions get made. And, the TOS and Voyager books I did, the biggest thing is you realize that all the departments don't know what the other departments are doing half the time. So doing the whole kind of like charting the journey and the evolution and so-and-so did this and so-and-so did that. And you're telling the actors, that's why your character did that. And they're going, oh, nobody told me. Or you're telling the writers and they're going, oh, they were that pissed off, were they? There's a whole kind of putting it together, which is a long-winded way of saying that's my passionate thing.
I gotta tell you, I'm actually a little moved by this panel because there's so much history here. Because back when Next Generation was in production, the three people that were really chronicling it in perfect detail, was Larry, who was doing a remarkable job, and that led to his first book. It was Ben in the UK, who was, one of the most well-versed, learned people in Star Trek, and if I might add, me, and the three of us, when I was writing for Cinefantastique, right? And, now it's really interesting to hear the people who do the new shows say, we have a bookshelf at the office, and it has Larry's book, so we understand, everything about these episodes and what went into making them, and then we have, Ben's stuff, which gives us an appreciation. We have, of course, the encyclopedia, which anyone working on Star Trek must own, and they all do. You see pictures of their offices. First thing on the shelf is this magnificent book, and it's even more magnificent in the expanded volume. And then they say, and to know how fucked up things were, we read your books. So it's like, and we realize it's not so bad because it was birthed back in the day. So it's just so miraculous because it kind of is the Mount Rushmore of Trek journalism sitting right here.
For sure. And Peter,
Yeah, and then there's me.
For you, when it came for you to do the center seat, the oral history of the history of the whole thing, obviously I'm sure the Fifth Year Mission volumes 1 and 2 were very, very big inspiration. But were some of the other books during your, I guess, formative years as a fan that you really took to?
I mean, for me, like the first one I had growing up was the Encyclopedia by the OKUDAs here, and that was, I forget where we bought that. My parents are in the crowd; they could probably tell me, but it was just always on the shelf there, and it was a beautiful thing. So there was those ones. I mean, Larry's books were very important. Mark's books were very important too. I mean, he was a big inspiration, and especially just the way oral histories get told. Like those were, it was very insightful there. So yeah, let's take a look.
And I was remiss not to say we also have the Next Generation Trek journalists here. You know, what he did with Center Seat, it's a fantastic book. And, you know, there are very few people, because especially with websites and the internet, very unreliable. People aren't good writers. They don't do their facts. Peter is like the next generation of what we did. They took it very serious. They're scholarly. They get to the bottom stuff. They're good writers, really good writers. So, I mean, Peter is definitely carrying on the tradition that I think we all started. Not to retire you in any way, because I know you're very active. You've got a new book coming out.
I edit too, yeah. So the other thing I thought, you know, worth talking about is how trying to find different perspectives on Star Trek, because, you know, when I said I was doing the TOS book, I called you and said, there's nothing left to say. It's been done. But we found stuff, and you find perspectives. But so this book I've just done with Nana, which I edited, she wrote, is, you know, about the history of what it was like to be a woman working on Star Trek and in the industry. Because to me, that Star Trek's always about more than about Star Trek. It's about life. It's about everything. And that's that gives you a different perspective. I think it's been, and I think a really interesting one, but we've just finished it, so I have no idea. I'm like, is this any good? I don't know.
When does that come out?
October 10th.
October
10th.
Hold it up, Ben. We're all waiting.
Hefty,
That looks
hefty
amazing. The Not Visitor wrote that, ladies and gentlemen. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Interviewed.
Very proud of
How many people interviewed?
I think there are 37 chapters, well, little chapters, so 37 profiles. But I mean, I lost track of how many people we interviewed, because we talked to every woman who ever wrote for the show who was still alive. We just missed Dorothy. But I talked to Dorothy.
Miss Sherry Lewis.
Yes, we did miss Sherry Lewis. But that's one of the weird things. Is the original series, more women writers than any other show, percentage terms, until the new shows.
Not on staff, but they're
yeah,
which is
contributors.
mostly there was no staff.
Episodes written by women.
All right, so I got to tell you, when Mark Altman sent me an early, I guess they call it a galley copy.
They do.
Okay, they do. Thank you. Of Volume 1 of the 50-year mission. I went away on vacation with my girlfriend. We went to Cabo San Lucas. I could not put this book down. She was so pissed. She was so mad. She said, will you put that goddamn book down? I couldn't. And then I got Volume 2 the following, like 6 months later. Mark, how did you combine all of your work, all of those interviews on cassettes, whatever, that you recorded, plus new interviews that you did, you and Edward Gross together writing the 50-year mission volumes 1 and 2, which is an absolute must-have on any Star Trek bookshelf.
Look, I was hoping Ed would be here. I know we're working. Oh, Ed, come on up.
What the hell are you doing down there? Get over here.
Ed, we're gonna get you. Take my chair. This is how we work when we write a book. We switch
Edward
off.
Gross, ladies and gentlemen. Please give it up for Edward Gross. Edward Gross, the biggest Superman fan I know. He wrote a book about Superman. He did. Edward Gross, ladies and gentlemen. So,
Please sit down.
And now, because you're both here, so Mark, first let's talk to putting this book together, and then Ed, I want to hear about your collaboration as a co-author with Mark.
Let's see if he's ready for the big chair. I'm not sure. I don't know. It might be a Riker situation. We may have to wait a couple years. But yeah, look, it was a remarkable combination of the scholarship we did over, thank you, of many years writing about Star Trek. Obviously, we interviewed, we went back to our archives for a lot of people who had passed away. But then we did hundreds of interviews that were new interviews for the new book. And it was so funny because Ed and I would get very competitive over our interviews. I got this, so-and-so said this, and so-and-so said that. Oh my God, that's amazing. No, I got somebody who said this. And then we got to a point where it's like, God, it's too bad Burton Armus. He was a producer on the second season. He was a drinking buddy with Maurice Hurley, but he wrote a bunch of episodes for Next Gen. I said, if only we had Burton Armus. And he goes, I think I might have interviewed him. I might be the only person who ever interviewed him. And he says, it's in the TARDIS. And he called his basement the TARDIS because whenever he went in there, he would find something that he had no right to ever have saved or found. And he found like this micro cassette of Burton Armus. And we're like, holy mackerel. It was this amazing unused interview. And so like, that was incredible. And we would just switch off. And I would just say, stop competing with me, Decker. Because he would top my interview and I would top his interview. And it was just a remarkable collaboration because, I had been out of journalism for a while. I was making TV and, producing and writing. And, I kind of got pulled in like Michael Corleone, but I'm so proud of that book because it's been so meaningful to people. But the highlight was working with Ed again. And, I used to read his articles in Starlog as a kid and, or as a teenager. I'm not that much younger than you. So it was really such a terrific feeling to collaborate with Ed over all these years. And, I think the work speaks for itself.
All right, Ed, I would like to hear more about, because, you've been a journalist for many years. You've written many books, you've written for, magazines, Starlog, whatever. But talk about, like, what you brought and your collaboration, your perspective on working with Mark on these books. Also, like Captain's Logs. You guys have written together for a long time.
Yeah, it started. I was publishing small press books back in the 80s, and Mark had done a magazine called Galactic Journal that had a set visit on Next Generation. So his phone number was in there, I think. So I contacted him and said, "Hey, I'm doing this book. Would you mind if I reprinted your set visit?" He carried on about my Starlog articles, which was very nice. And from there, we just started collaborating. We did a number of books in the late 80s, early 90s.
The first time I was on set was for Too Short a Season. You know who gave me the tour of the Enterprise of the Next Generation sets?
No.
This man right here, Mike OKUDA. That was the first time I ever met him.
Wow.
Yep.
Pretty good. Well, thanks, Mike. Because of you.
He's a great tour guide, but he's a better art director and concept designer and graphic designer. But he was a great tour guide, too.
Because I recognize your name from the magazine articles.
All right. So, Mike and Denise, so the Star Trek Technical Manual, it's like, it's like the Compendium and like the Next Gen Companion. It's like, you gotta have it on your bookshelf. But the attention to detail that Mike and Denise and Rick Sternbach brought to the Technical Manual was just the tip of the iceberg for the attention to detail. And again, this goes really, really deep into the minutiae and the deep dive of it all for the mammoth 2-volume Star Trek encyclopedia, which weighs, seriously, 50 pounds. So, Mike, you had written, a version of the encyclopedia before, but how did this definitive version up to and including 2016 really, really take the cake, again, with all of the work that you've done and how much commitment, how much time you had to put into that so that the finest detail would be, like, noticed by fans and approved?
It first started when there was a meeting that we weren't present at, where there was a meeting with Roddenberry and representatives from various publishing concerns, that it was very hard for a Star Trek novel or comic book to be consistent with the show itself. Oh, well, no, that would have happened before the Federation was founded. But was it before or after Spock's birthday? All these things. And there was, even though almost everyone had some idea of most of this, there was no central reference.
I was going to say, this is before Starter.com, this is before Memory Alpha, this is...
long before.
Yes, you've got papers and files and people's memories, and that's it, yeah.
This is circa 1990-ish. And we weren't at the meeting, but we're told that someone said, well, we should get someone to basically build a spreadsheet of dates. And the question was, who would be the poor schmuck to do it? And supposedly, Roddenberry said, well, we should get Mike and Denise to do it. And that eventually morphed into the Star Trek chronology. So we watched all the episodes, took ridiculous amounts of notes, and did this book. We're very proud of it. Then a couple of years later, or a couple of months later, really, I think it was Kevin Ryan at Pocket Books called us and said, would you consider doing an encyclopedia? And prior to that, my answer would have been, heck no.
Maybe you need to explain what an encyclopedia is to the kids in here.
An encyclopedia is a database sorted alphabetically. So we had all this information, and I thought, well, actually, and I very stupidly said, well, how hard could it be? We just take the same information and sort it alphabetically instead of chronologically.
And famous last words.
So Larry, my question is, I see right now, here's the revised and updated version of the Star Trek The Next Generation campaign. Why, please tell me, just break some news here for us today, that you will be revising that book again to include the 3 seasons of Picard.
Somebody keeps saying that to me. Yes, that would be awesome. I just wanted to say real quick, though, when I did the blue, the red, and then the black had all the movies in it, finally in 2002, but nobody knew what the... There's like, well, because I had originally, not knowing that they'd gone with you all for the
Larry, I'm sorry, I
encyclopedia.
can give up my chair again.
I had...
Jeff Bond, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, there we go.
Author of music of Star Trek.
You're over here.
Jeff.
Come sit. But real quick, I had done a self-published Bijo update because I like doing that. And then they said, we want you to take your book and do that. And people on the staff, and we're using it. The writers were using my, whatever. And you all, it was a good help for you all getting boosted, I think. And I said, yay, it's all written. They said, well, but now Mike and Denise are going to encyclopedia. Could you do a making of? And I was like, oh my God, okay, yes, that'd be awesome. Can you do it in 3 months? And I'm like, and I have visions of Stephen Whitfield's book and all that, and I know how you said discern. Fans are going to go, well, this is crap. He did this in 3 months. I couldn't have that. You couldn't be the guy that just cranked out the thing. But somehow we did it, and then updated and updated. But that was, you had that. You're talking about the discerning fans. I could not be that person that just cranked the thing out. And somehow, I may have the only book that has footnotes because I was not ripping off Ed and everybody else who had done interviews because I had 3 months to do it. I did a little interviewing and then did more and more and more as the years went on until finally, even after Next Gen ended, as you know, everyone just kept working on the series, writers and everybody up and down the design line, and I love this new concept, Mark, where you just do glorified transcripts of your interviews, and that's a thing, because I should have done that years ago.
Is that
I've got everybody through Enterprise. I've got tons of people through Enterprise that's still sitting, mostly untranscribed.
If there's, I want to go to Jeff, but I just have to say, when people say an oral history is a glorified transcript, it is.
I know, I'm kidding. Yes.
And I know you're kidding, but this is something we hear. What we say, it's like having a dinner party with 500 of your closest friends, and you get them drunk, and you hear what they have to say when they. So it's taking all these interviews and making a linear story and telling. That is such a complicated task. In fact, we found the oral history format better to read, but harder to write.
Well, as opposed to having millions of words of wonderful stuff and having to cram it onto dead tree media. Digital world, you don't have to worry about that, but trying to cram that into those little episode notes.
But look who's here!
Okay,
Jeff
all right,
Bond.
here. So ladies and gentlemen, so Jeff Bond is like, whenever I know that Jeff Bond is writing something or has written something, like it's like a must-have. His book on the music of Star Trek, the making of Star Trek, the motion picture, which is an amazing book. But go into the music of Star Trek. I mean, like there's like you've written the companion, you've written the compendium, you've written the 50-year mission, the encyclopedia. But the music is special. The music is special, especially TOS music. So like when you got to write that, like that's like such a unique take on something that has not been done by anyone else. How much fun was it? How much work did it take for you to really just like do the music justice?
Well, first I'd like to apologize for arriving late. I was having so much fun selling coffee in the hall that I completely lost track of time. But yeah, that was the first book I got to do, and I was obsessed with that music since I was a kid. And I was living in Ohio when I started working on the interviews for that book, so I remember getting like Gerald Fried on the phone, and Gerald Fried, if you're not a Trekkie, which everybody in here I assume is, wrote the music for Amok Time and the incredible fight music for that. And at that time, it was being, parodied a lot in like The Cable Guy and on The Simpsons and stuff. So I had, Gerald Fried on the phone, and this was how primitive my end of this was. I didn't know how to record phone calls. So I got an answering machine, which is something we used to have in the distant past. And this machine, it was illegal to tape record people without their knowledge. So this machine would beep every 10 seconds. So to alert the person that they're being recorded. And somehow these wonderful grand old men, you know, put up with that, like conducted an entire interview with like a beep, beep. But I had Gerald Fried on the phone, and I was like, "What? So have you ever heard any of your music like referenced or parodied?" And at the other end, he's like, "Oh, I just heard this the other day," and he starts playing the fight music from Amok Time on the piano. So that was a very much a mind-blowing experience.
Also, at the same time, you know, there have been books written about the making of Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
Jeff wrote a beautiful book about the motion picture.
I'm getting to that.
No, okay.
I'm getting to that. But like when you and your co-author, whose name is
Gene Kazicki.
Gene Kazicki, thank you. The thing is, like that book, like I couldn't wait to get it. When I got it, I posted a picture of me holding it on social media because I was so excited. I love motion picture. But that followed the oral history of the motion picture, Return to Tomorrow, which is actually a hard book to find.
Yeah.
So when you really started to go at that book, at your making of motion picture, you know, what were some of the new discoveries that you found, like, so that you could make it fresh and essential?
Well, I'll tell you, you know, what was most exciting for me doing that was talking to a guy named Richard Taylor, and this is sort of a long story, but what everyone knows about Star Trek: The Motion Picture is that Robert Abel and Associates, the visual effects company, was fired, and they sort of assumed that this whole group of people was kicked off the movie, and then Doug Trumbull and John Dykstra finished it. So one of the things that we sort of wanted to do was rehabilitate, you know, the name of Richard Abel and Associates, because when I was, you know, a teenager, to completely date myself, in the 70s, between like 2001 and Star Wars, there were not really any great visual effects movies, but there were incredible visual effects on television, in commercials and in title sequences, like the ABC Tuesday Night Movie. All these crazy psychedelic. There was
7-Up.
Yeah, commercials for
jeans.
7-Up and Levi's. Yeah, where they would have, you know, jeans walking through these like psychedelic environments, and women flying through space with these sparkling crystals and lens flares and all this stuff. And I would watch those things. At that point, I knew how special effects were done with miniatures and blue screen and stuff. But I would be watching this stuff and have no idea how any of it was done. And all of those things were done by Robert Abel and people who worked for him. And they were hired because of those commercials to work on Star Trek: The Motion Picture, to try and take this unique approach to the visual effects in that movie. And they were trying so hard to be experimental and invent new techniques that they basically never got any of the work done. So they wound up getting fired, but Richard Taylor stayed on board the movie, and he had worked on, you know, these laser shows for rock groups and stuff. And what people don't realize is how much of this kind of like psychedelic 70s aesthetic went into the first Star Trek movie. Richard Taylor designed the Enterprise. He finalized the design on the engines. And so the whole look of that ship, the color, the fact that you've got these like blue kind of neon built into the engines and everything, that is all out of this kind of aesthetic of 70s, you know, cutting edge commercials. So that was the most interesting. We were just sitting around with Richard Taylor, and he would be telling us how he did, you know, how he's hanging out with these rock groups in the 60s and doing laser shows, and that's how he got into doing visual effects. So that's what I love the most, I think, about doing that project.
You know, when I was reading where did Mark go? Oh, there he is. So when I was reading, I'm glad you're here, Ed, because when I was reading both volumes of the 50-year mission, so being like a massive TOS guy, like I thought volume 1 would be my jam, and it is, but volume 2 is incredible. 2 great parts of volume 2, which cover Next Generation to the Kelvin movies. So part one, the first part that I love is reading about the first couple seasons of Next Generation. It is a miracle that show made it past the first season. Like reading the oral history of season 1 of Next Gen with Roddenberry's attorney, it's insane. But the other thing, Ed, is the conversation you had with Kate Mulgrew. Oh. Like, can you please, you know what I'm talking about, can you please tell me how you got Kate Mulgrew to talk about a subject matter that was not easy for her to talk about?
Yeah, we were winding down on the book, and the Voyager chapter had a number of people talking about Kate in less than flattering way, and her behavior and treatment towards Jerry Ryan and that kind of thing. And I kept trying to reach her, and her people kept saying no, no, no. And then I finally wrote them and said, listen, we're just doing our due diligence here. The book is almost finished. We spoke to Jerry, we spoke to Robert Beltran, we spoke to this one and that one, and I'd love to get her views on things. That day, I got a response saying she'll meet you for lunch in Manhattan at a certain day and time at a restaurant. So we met, and I went there, to do an interview about Voyager in general, but then towards the end, and I guess you knew it was coming, I said, listen, there's something I have to talk about. It's a little less than flattering. And she just closed her eyes for a second, said, go ahead. So I told her that this is what people had been saying, and her response shocked me. It was, they're right. Jerry Ryan came to do a job, she did the job, and she did it spectacularly. She got very vulnerable and said, I thought I was enough for that show, and it turned out it wasn't, and I had a very hard time dealing with that. But any drama with that on set was me and my behavior and my reaction to the fact that they brought her on the show. And not against her, but against the character and how Janeway had been sort of sidelined. Well, I have never seen a section of a book take such a different turn because we were able to end with Kate's comments. And she went from being sort of this perceived villainous if that's too strong a word, but very negative comments people had made. And suddenly she flipped it, and suddenly her honesty just changed the whole narrative of that part of the book. And it was very end of the book we got her, and it really, in my mind, just changed the Voyager chapter for the better.
Absolutely, absolutely. But on that note, Ben, when you were working on this book with Nana, that's coming out in October, I know just because I had read another interview with Nana elsewhere, somewhere online, I don't remember where, but the book started off, it was not going to be as big as it turned out to be. So how did the narrative on this new book about women in Star Trek continue to change while you were writing it?
Well, so we did, God knows how many interviews. I mean, endless interviews over Zoom. And it's a subject, certainly, I'm editing this, and I do not know what it feels like to be a woman or the experiences that they had. And Nana had certain preconceptions, I guess, about how people, what kind of things people have experienced at different times. And as you're doing the book, you're finding the book. It's the same thing with Ed saying about talking to Kay. That you don't know, if you know before you start, you're not doing it properly. So it changes as you go. It's an incredibly positive story, actually, Star Trek, that, the experiences that the women had basically get better. It's a story of victory. But you hope that's going to be the case when you start the interviews, but it's only when you actually do them. And I had so many moments that as a man, I was like, oh shit, yes, of course. I would never have thought of that. The one I always quote is that Gates, going into TNG, Gates was the most experienced director, and she's the last member of the cast who gets to direct. And we talked to her about it, and she said, well, Jonathan could go into Rick's office and stick his feet up on the table and shoot the breeze and chat, and that's how he got to direct. As a woman, I couldn't do that because he would have thought I was coming on to him. And it's just kind of like penny drops for this old man, And there are just loads of things like that, and loads of things that people see things differently now, or don't see things differently now. Yeah. And then I was looking at something and saying, well, that's what it felt like at the time, and you don't think that's a problem. I mean, someone like Kate's just like kick them in the balls. If they give you trouble, kick them in the balls, and you just accept that's the way it is. Whereas a lot of the other actors feel very differently. So yeah, that experience of a book changing as you write it is a really, it's one of the most enjoyable things.
So Peter, like working on a center seat, by this point, certainly there have been a lot of books written about the making of the various Star Trek shows. So while you were working on the center seat book, how conscious were you to like really make it fresh? And what were the challenges to make it fresh?
Well, I think the fun part about telling a history of a franchise long after the fact is that people aren't quite as beholden to their NDAs as they were when the show was on, and especially when a book is like done in tandem with Paramount Pictures or whatever. An author might feel, or the actors, the interviewees might feel like they need to hold back a bit. So there was a lot of interviews that were just very fresh, very raw. People could talk about, like, as progressive as a show like Deep Space Nine could be, there were still issues, behind the scenes, and people could talk about that. And also, people like Harold Livingston could just be curmudgeonly because that's the way he always is. But yeah.
So
Harold and Gene.
Okay, yeah.
I was just going to say Harold and Gene. That's another stuff that's in Jeff's book. But Harold and Gene. You want to talk about stress on Star Trek sets? Star Trek: The Motion Picture is like the biggest battle ever.
I got to say that one author I wish was here joining us on this panel. He wrote a 3-volume series on the original series called These Are the Voyages. And I remember when I read volume 1, it came out in 2013. It wasn't like an official CBS Paramount book, and but I started reading. I'm like, oh my God. Like, that book just rocked my world. I couldn't put the goddamn thing down. But Jeff, I know you love those books too. Like, what was it like the first time, like, just being just a lifer, diehard, deep dive kind of guy with especially TOS, and you're reading volume 1 of These Are the Voyages. What was that like?
What's great about those books are he dug up all these memos and letters and everything, so you really felt like you were in the middle of those productions and finding out everything that went wrong. And those were it's a 3-volume, all sorts of stuff that I never knew. So
reading the memos from like Gene Coon, like that stuff was gold.
Yeah.
Well, that was one of the things about the original making of Star Trek, was he included all those, not just the call sheets and production reports, but all those memos and the and the Great Bird of the Galaxy memo and all those things. But one of the things about not only having 3 months to do the first companion was I was dumped in like 5th season. And you should say, like, what did Pocketbooks, the print run of the tech manual, they were so afraid of how what was the first print run of the tech manual? Was it like 2,000, 5,000?
No,
and then it sold.
We were lucky because typically those books were, I don't know the number, but I'm going to guess 10,000. But then
that was then as well, when people bought books.
Yeah, but before we did the tech manual, our friend Shane Johnson, who's now Laura Johnson, wrote Mr. Scott's Guide to the Enterprise, and it was a wonderful dive into the movie Enterprise, and that did spectacularly well. I think I'm not sure, but it's something on the order of like 35. So the tech manual, and I don't remember the print numbers, but they started around there, and it went up dramatically from that.
Because you were supposed to, the tech manual was delayed a year, and then the first year of the companion were almost just a few months apart. But Mr. Scott's Guide was the original series and the original crew, and there was later on figured out there was so much hesitation about would this new series really take off, and would it be a book buying, and people were buying novels, but the behind the scenes and all of that was like a big question mark. And I just remember hearing that the tech manual, like they'd print a little bit and they'd be sold out in 2 days, and they'd have to print a few more. It's like they had to keep slapping Simon, like, no, people are going to buy this. The show is taking off. It's okay to print a few. You won't be sitting with stacks of unsold books in the warehouse. And so by the time, but they did the same thing with the companion. But I just remember that hesitancy at the beginning.
I
But
remember
where I got dropped in, though, was 5th season, and that big turner, the Maury Herb, the first 2 years, the Chaos on the Bridge years, and then Michael Piller coming in, and everybody from 3rd season on was there and was happy to talk. But Dorothy and David Gerald and all the people who had been burned and had left in the 1st season had either already died or did not want to talk about it. And thank God, Bob Justman, I went over to the house, and here's Bob that I'd always heard about and read about, sat down, and we spent 5 hours, and he was printing memos out of his home computer for me that now are out, but back in the day. And if it didn't, I wouldn't have had a book at the beginning, because I was still measuring myself against the making of. But I had 3 months to do it. But that was a crazy time, and you had a time, the 20-year statute of everybody getting over the NDAs, or the pissed about it and didn't want to talk yet. And then Bob's and Herb Solo's book came out and was kind of that era too.
Do you remember the book Letters to Star Trek? Yeah, sure. Yeah. My favorite thing in that is that, it's all fan letters to Star Trek. One of them is like, oh, I love the show. Everything's great about it. I love the cast and all the characters. Can you please send me an autographed picture of the Enterprise? So they sent him a picture of the Enterprise, signed, yours truly, the USS Enterprise.
Oh, wow. That actually brings up a good point. I just want to go down the line here with the time we have left. Quickly go through, in the writing of the book or books that you did, starting with you, Ed, what was your favorite thing to write about, whether it's 50-Year Mission or Captain's Logs or whatever Star Trek book you wrote? Favorite thing to write about?
My favorite thing, really, and I've said this before, though, is Volume 1 of 50-Year Mission, when we really dug into the 70s, from the cancellation of the show to the release of Star Trek: The Motion Picture, because it's this period where it should have been dead, it should have stayed dead because it was canceled in '69, but we spoke to the people who first launched it on local news, airing it 5 nights a week, which is where it started to grow. So piecing together that part of the history, which is responsible for everything that's followed, was my favorite part of writing 50-Year Mission, because it's just so significant in my mind to what we have today. So that's my favorite.
Ben, what about you? What was your favorite thing to write about?
For me, I think when we did the TOS Celebration book and putting the Leonard Nimoy chapter together, because I'd talked to Leonard a few times and he told the same stories he told lots of people. But when you actually put it all out chronologically, and you're like, oh, okay, this is when he learns not to smile. This is when he says, let's do the nerve pinch. This is when he does the mind meld. And you actually look at it chronologically and you're like, oh my God, I can see the character building. And how by the time you get to the end of that first season, he had a really clear concept of who Spock was. But you always remember at the beginning, he had no idea. He was literally making it up as he went along and lobbying the writers. And it just kind of, it's something you've heard 1,000 times, and then you write it and suddenly you understand it. And that's always when I feel good when you do that.
Mike, what about you and Denise? What was the best thing, your favorite thing to write about?
For me, I wrote the Next Generation Tech Manual with Rex Sternbach, and it was in universe, and it was deliberately obtuse technical jargon. And being geeks, we had a huge amount of fun writing that. But wherever I could, I would write these little sidebars, little stories of things that happened on set, little anecdotes or behind-the-scenes things. And I showed it to Denise. I said, do you think this would work? And Denise immediately fell in love with it. And she said, yeah, you got to do this.
Yeah.
The funny thing is that everybody else was vehemently opposed to it. It wrecks the book. Because I saw that gleam in Denise's eye, so I said, no, we're doing this. And it turns out people would read all the footnotes and ignore all the obtuse technology.
They understood the footnotes.
Denise.
I think for me, the very first Star Trek encyclopedia was the most fun because everybody left us alone. It was before we had to sign up the attorneys to get photo approval, etc. If you made a sincere effort, that was enough. And so we were able to put a lot of stuff in also. Photoshop. It was the book was in black and white, but we did a lot of fun stuff. Like we did Captain April, and it was Gene Roddenberry, and I mean we did fun stuff like that. And then when we finished when we laid out the book ourselves, we did everything ourselves. We handed it to Pocketbooks on a disc, which was unheard of back then. Yeah. And so that was really fun. And then as the years progressed, of course, things got more complicated and taken out of our hands and so forth and so on.
How about you, Peter?
For me, it was the first chapter of the book. I kind of go through the history before the history. It was all about talking about Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz and how influential that was, not just in the making of Star Trek, but also in the entire making of television as we know it. Prior to I Love Lucy, like TV just wasn't filmed on like film. It was broadcast live. And it was very hard to keep recordings of that. And it was really Desi Arnaz and his business savvy was like, no, we're going to record these things. I'm going to keep them. And if you ever want them back, I'm going to charge you a buttload of money to get them. And it's because of that really created the funding that they were able to put into Star Trek later.
All right, Larry, what about you?
Yeah, real quick. So I started off as a Universe canon guy. That was my thing. And it was a little disappointing not to turn my self-published encyclopedias, concordances, but when the challenge of doing the behind the scenes, and the favorite thing wound up being not just what was done, but like with the writers and the art people, the roads not taken, just that kind of insight, and then just in the bigger picture, just getting it recorded and getting all these people recorded, and not just the writers and the top, but all the way up and down the line in all the departments, and getting that preserved because we let so many folks, you know, get away that we didn't get recorded. That, and then real quick, my total sidebar with my old thing of star charting and winding up work Mike's originals and then Jeff Mandel's and getting to do stellar cartography, and now seeing all the modern shows use the stellar cartography maps as the official, you know, now everything's standardized and canonized.
Nicely done. Jeff?
Well, I don't know if it's my favorite, but when I was doing the Art of the Kelvin timeline book, I wish it was books, I was talking to Ryan Church about designing the Enterprise, and that, you know, this is the JJ Prize, which is a somewhat controversial starship that not everybody loves, but it does look like the Enterprise. When you look at it, it's recognizably the Enterprise. And when I was talking to Ryan Church about the evolution of that design, you know, one of the first things he said was, well, when we started out, we were going to make this into something completely different. It was going to be something that looked nothing like the original Enterprise. And that would have changed everything, I think, because, you know, obviously the Kelvin timeline led into the current TV shows, which have ships in it that look like the Enterprise. And so you can complain about those, but we could be dealing with something that had nothing to do with that 50 to 60-year-old design. So that really struck me that a major bullet was dodged there.
It's out, yeah, for sure. All right, Mark Altman, take us out. Loaded question: of all the books, all the writing you've done on Star Trek, what was your favorite thing to write about?
Galactica 1980 for So Say We All. No, really. We wrote this chapter on Galactica 1980 for So Say We All, and I read it, and it was so perfunctory. It was so, like, generic. I'm like, this is one of the worst shows of all time. No one else is ever going to write about it. We have to do just the Altman Gross justice to this. And I went back, I threw out everything we did and rewrote it from scratch. I did a whole bunch more interviews, rewrote the whole chapter, and to me it's one of the funniest, most crazy things that I've ever written in any of our books. So, but obviously the 50-year mission is so much I could tell you about, but I don't want to.
Well, The Return of Starbuck is one of the best episodes of Battlestar Galactica. So,
but we owe such a debt to the people on this stage for preserving for posterity all these stories and all these legends, and all the people we lost, everyone from Gene Kuhn to Manny Cotto to Harold Livingston. They continue to live through your words, and we really owe all of you a debt of gratitude. So thanks for being here today. Yeah, so that was another great panel from Vegas. So many great panels, and as we've mentioned before on this podcast, we're not going to be sharing all our panels because that would be unfair to the people who actually made the trek to Vegas. So we're sharing select.
We want to
select
maintain
panels.
some of the value.
For example, you can have this chronicle of chronicling the chroniclers.
I'm
But
not
all
saying
the
there are
chronicles.
any technical difficulties that would prevent us from putting up any panels. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that we're not going to put up all the panels. We're going to put up select panels over the next couple of weeks. We'll be sharing some, and then also there will be a few select panels only available on Deck 78.
Right.
So you have to be a Trekspert Plus subscriber
on that.
to hear those commercial-free episodes of Deck 78 with our STLV panels, including we just dropped Super Sci-Fi 79. So if you're dying to hear about the black hole, you definitely want to subscribe to Trekspert Plus. And there are also some other great panels and original episodes that will be
Or if you hate the
posted on
black
Deck
hole,
78.
the next episode will be better.
The next one will be better. Yeah. At some point, we got to actually play a few more clips from the Plan 9. We're never going to make that whole stage reading available because we don't have the agreement with the talent to release it. But I wouldn't be adverse to releasing more clips from it.
Select morsels.
Yeah, just to whet your appetite, to amuse your captain.
Just a little.
Sorry,
to
Mike.
Wet my beak.
Who's Mike?
It was so great. That Plan 9 was so great. Oh my god. Oh my god. Is the theremin player still calling you?
Oh yeah. Hey, it's me. It's Michael. What are you wearing?
That's not going on.
That's not happening. Please don't say that. Please don't get us sued. Jeez, man.
What are you wearing?
Jeez Louise.
My sequined vest.
Yeah.
Well, I want
awesome.
I want to remind you guys as we count down to Star Trek Day, as it's come to be known. September 7th marks the anniversary of the release of the Star Trek first episode, The Man Trap. Will be dropping on a
Well,
special
even though
day.
September 8th is actually the day. September 8th is the United States Day.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm a proud United States citizen, so I guess
United
I'm going to have
Statesian.
to go with September 8th. So much for Treksperts.
On the actual Trek Day. There you go.
So on September 7th, Saturday morning, September 7th, we're going to drop an anniversary episode. Saturday Morning Fever. This is another one of our great panels from Star Trek Las Vegas.
Right.
This was a tribute to animated Star Trek, in which we had William Simpson, who played young Spock, and the creative team behind Prodigy join us to talk about animated Star Trek. And it was a terrific panel. We actually invited people to arrive early, where they would be feted with cereal and coffee, chicken sandwich and coffee. They got
will be
coffee
feted. You mean fed?
No, that too. With they would be they from our friends at Pop
They would be
Culture
given
Coffee, our pain in the ass friends at Pop Culture Coffee, and gave them some coffee, gave them some cereal. It was terrific. So
This is my box cereal and coffee.
and we showed some vintage commercials, and it was really a fun time. So we're looking forward to sharing that panel with you on Saturday, September 7th. So get up early, wear your Star Trek pajamas, and enjoy a very special bonus episode of Inglorious Treksperts. Then we'll be back with some additional, and we'll be wrapping up the 6th season, and starting later in September will be our season premiere of the 7th season.
My goodness.
7 seasons. So that's pretty exciting stuff. I can't believe we've been doing this. What's the quote from Saturday Night Live?
We thought it was just a lark for a couple years, and it's turned into an immense waste of time.
Colossal waste of time.
Colossal waste of time. Colossal waste of time. By the way, I have to admit that was the one thing during our Shatner commentary that I just had to go off book. I had to go off the rails and say, I just stopped in the middle of Star Trek 5 and said, so Bill, I got a question for you. It has nothing to do with the movie. And he's like, I think he was really afraid. And I said, why did you never do Saturday Night Live again? I don't understand. He's so brilliant in Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
It's not just that skit. It's like the T.J. Hooker thing,
Yeah.
the
The Mute
Oliver
Marine.
North thing. I was just going to say the Mute Marine. He's so good. It's like insane that they never
And the
had him
Christmas
back.
party, where he's
Yep.
where he's with the singing sisters.
Yeah, yeah. We could do a whole episode just on his Saturday Night Live.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
We'd have to get him for that. He wouldn't remember. Or would he?
Won't remember.
Yeah.
Maybe. Who knows?
He might. He remembers more than he lets on.
Yeah, that's true.
So he might remember. He's so good.
He's a wily one, that Kirk.
Oh yeah. 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 I'm glad to see they promoted Sulu. You got a good driver? You got somebody good to drive the bus now? Oh,
Your driver is Sulu, rated 5 stars. The Uber prize.
Yeah. On the back of the Excelsior. Honk if you like tea. We're
now going 60 miles an hour.
Oh my God. Okay. Well, this was fun. I thought that was a special panel. It meant a lot to me. I mean, because obviously a lot of us were writing these books, around the same time. But didn't really have anything to do with each other. And so it was interesting to sort of unite sort of this all-star team of Star Trek journalists / writers, authors. I think it was a really interesting panel. I hope you feel that way as well.
And also, the making of Star Trek was incredibly impressive on me. And just as a shameless plug, I'm going to be releasing my audiobook for the making of Star Trek on my Patreon, which is Patreon/Beta5 Productions, all one word. And you can join in the fun there with
you can do all the
making of
voices?
Star Trek. I did all the voices.
Wow,
All
that's
the
so
voices.
cool.
My Bob
You gotta
Justman
check
isn't
that
very
out.
good, but the rest of them are okay.
Yeah, but who knows what Bob Justman sounded like anyway?
I do.
Okay. It's kind of like when you do your Roddenberry for Shatner, and he's like, I don't remember what he sounded like. I don't remember. Well, Bill, this is the best Gene Roddenberry you're ever going to hear. Nobody does Gene Roddenberry like DAREN. I'll take your
Not
word for
anymore.
Nobody does Gene Roddenberry.
That's true.
Definitely not anymore.
That's true. Well, I still, my white whale of an episode is doing an episode on that Inside Star Trek record album. I've tried to get Ed Naha on the show for years.
Yeah.
And I think, what we might end up doing is we should just do an episode on it, and I'll repeat stories from my interview with him in the book. Because we can't actually get him on the show. And it's just impossible to get him to respond to emails. I just think that's an important, important, because especially around the anniversary on September 8th, we're doing a lot of TOS centric episodes to honor the anniversary, because we know that other places that are feting Star Trek Day won't be. They won't be.
Right.
So,
and it's also the anniversary of the animated show, because that
it
also
is.
premiered
That's a good
on
point.
September 8th. So
that's right, in the United States.
In the United States.
But not in Los Angeles.
Not in Los Angeles. That's correct. Luckily, I wasn't in Los Angeles at that time.
No, neither was I. They all missed out. DAREN did something really fun, and then we're gonna go for which we're not gonna air. But he did a version of the animated series premiere with original Star Trek music instead of the Filmation library, and it's really fun. It's really fun to hear it with the original Star Trek music.
The pace is much slower, and it's really amazing how much difference the music makes. Because I love the animated music, and it fits with it so well. But it's also an interesting experiment to see how TOS music works.
You know what the problem is? When I hear that animated music, I can't get it out of my head. It's literally like in The Survivors with Troy.
And you think of Lassie's Rescue Rangers.
Where she can't get that.
Rescue Rangers. See?
God, yes, I was watching Curb Your Enthusiasm with Isaac, and we're watching it from the beginning because he loves seeing. He now is a big fan of Jeff Garland's after seeing him at a screening of Crimes and Misdemeanors. So it's so funny because it was like the second episode, and Mary Steenburgen's mother is played by Anne Haney, and I said, "Do you know who Anne Haney is?" He goes, "No, she looks familiar." I said, "That's Kevin Uxbridge's wife. I guess the Hoosnock left her alone because
Hoosnocks, the Hoosnockers.
Yeah, the Hoosnock. Okay. Holiday specials are coming up in a couple of months too.
Speaking of the survivors, the holiday
Yeah, let's see if we can
coming up.
survive another year of holiday specials. Okay, look, we got a lot to do here, so we're gonna go. But thanks for joining us for another episode of the Inglorious Treksperts. We'll be back next Thursday with an all-new episode. So on behalf of Ashley Edward Miller, Darren Dochterman, myself, Mark A. Altman, keep on trekking ingloriously, of course. Shh.